Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College, now becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College, the first choice to start a bachelor's degree since tuition is one-third the cost of four-year schools. More at tncc.edu.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. This is Barbara Ham-Lee. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is the Biden nominee to the Supreme Court and is currently being vetted by U.S. senators as part of the confirmation process. If approved, she will become the first Black woman to ever serve on the highest court in the land. Why is her nomination such a point of contention for some senators? And what will be her influence on future SCOTUS decisions? Plus, the latest on Ukraine and other current event analysis on this edition of the Claville Report. Another View will be right back after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. WHRO has lifted COVID restrictions here at the station, which means we can have guests with us in the studio. And I was so excited that my friend and political junkie, Dr. Eric Claville, would be with me here in person with his award-winning Claville Report. But as often happens, life got in the way, and Dr. Claville had to travel to Richmond today, so he's joining us by phone. Dr. Eric Claville is the director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University and also serves as the interim executive advisor to the president on government relations. How are you, Eric? I miss you.
I'm doing great, Barbara, and I miss everyone as well. And I'm so glad that we're headed toward endemic. So thank God for all the people in our medical health care and scientists that work to get us to this point.
Absolutely. And we are also so honored to have with us Dr. Peggy Lewis, the former executive dean of the School of Business and Graduate Studies and the School of Professional Studies at Trinity Washington University. She's also active with the Black Women's Leadership Collective, a leadership and organizing hub for Black women's organizations, advocates, and supporters, utilizing their collective efforts to support the nomination of the first Black woman to the U.S. Supreme Court. Welcome, Peggy Lewis. How are you?
Good to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. So I must start with you, and I'm going to ask you, did the members collectively of the Black Women's Collective do the proverbial happy dance at the nomination of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson?
You have to know, tears of joy, tears of pride. We're just beyond excited about this nomination because it is about time that we have a Black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Absolutely. So how do you respond to those who say, this is just affirmative action, this doesn't really matter, why do we need a Black woman on the court?
She is exceptionally qualified. She has the experience, she has character, she has integrity. She graduated from Harvard. She has been a trial, she's been a prosecutor, not a prosecutor. She has been a public defender.
Mm-hmm.
She just brings an enormous amount of qualification to this. And so anyone who says it's just an affirmative action appointment is not reading the facts, and it's not looking at what she brings. It's not looking at her history. It's not looking at her qualifications. It's not looking at her education. She's profoundly qualified.
So, Peggy, do you know what made her stand out over all of the other potential folks that were being considered?
Well, you know what? I think Judge Jackson has a proven track record. I mean, she has had bipartisan support in the Senate. She was just approved for the third time this past summer. she's been confirmed 3 times. That's unusual with bipartisan support because you know how the Congress has been.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason to expect that she wouldn't get the same. There's no excuse when she got bipartisan support this past summer to get onto the bench that she is currently serving on before this nomination.
Mm-hmm. So, Eric, since she has been vetted 3 times and has passed with bipartisan support, what's the process now, Eric? And should this go as quickly as, say, what happened with Judge Coney Barrett?
You know, Barbara, as my colleague just articulated, you know, she's been approved 3 times, and with this process, she starts formally going and meeting again with senators and so forth, taking meetings. The interesting thing about this part is that remember when President Obama nominated Merrick Garland from the appellate circuit, D.C. circuit, none of the Republican senators would even take his visit. So she's actually sitting and taking pictures with Republican senators, of course, Democratic senators. We saw her with Mitch McConnell. We saw her with Senator Schumer. So this seems to be going at a rate where, because of the nuclear option that was implemented by Mitch McConnell, who I call Justice McConnell during that time period because how many Supreme Court justices they packed the court with. Now they only need a simple majority, and I believe that they can do it. The votes seem to be there, and it looks like it will. To your point, Barbara, it will go as fast as Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, yeah.
So are there, and this is a question to both of you, and I'll start with you, Peggy. Are there any sticking points or anything of contention that you've heard that senators are some senators may be thinking of that may derail or try to derail her confirmation? And if so, what are you guys doing, particularly the collective, to try to combat that?
So far, we haven't heard anything because of her track record and because of how qualified she is. And I think that was the brilliance of bringing up this appointment. President Biden is keeping up a campaign promise to nominate a Black woman, but he had a short list of a whole bunch of fabulous Black women. So, you know, Judge Jackson just rose to the top, I think, primarily because of her amazing track record. You know, she authored about 600 decisions during her considerable judicial service. And I mean, she's been overruled just about 2% of the time, which is a very low rate. So I just don't think there's enough here for anybody to bring her track record into any kind of negative connotation. She is a fabulous judicial appointment.
Okay. Eric, same question to you.
You know what? Let me just say this. Barbara, let me just say this. You know, she comes from humble beginnings. She grew up in Washington, D.C. She was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in Miami, Florida. You know, I love how she said she stands on the shoulders of Judge Constance Baker Motley, who, you know, was the first Black woman to stand before the Supreme Court and argue a case. And so for her to have that kind of humble regard for our ancestors and who came before us and knowing that she's a trailblazer, knowing that she's making history, I just love that she gave that kind of deference to Constance.
Absolutely. Eric, and do you see any pitfalls or any issues that might be raised that may cause a stalling or any issues with her confirmation?
No, you know, just as a colleague just articulated, this is her 3rd time. Even recently, since June 2021, being confirmed, United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. And I saw this letter of support by over 200 Black women law professors across the country that went to, of course, Senators Schumer, McConnell, Grassley, and Dick Durbin, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, in support of her. And because of that, you know, she has not just the humble beginnings that my colleague just articulated, but she worked her way up and through and has proven herself on every level. Not only that, but let's look at the political side of it. I mean, she's now part of the Boston elite as well, you know, with her and her husband, who her husband, you know, of course, is part of the Harvard community. So that also works in her favor. And I say that that's one thing that supporters of others that want to be nominated said that, you know, is Harvard and Yale going to have a monopoly on the Supreme Court? But But that's an argument for another day. But but again, she's worked her way up, and she's unapologetically, proud of who she is, where she comes from, and the shoulders that she stands on. And that's the type of representation that we'll see on this court since the time of the late, great Thurgood Marshall.
So if she joins the Supreme Court, what will be her influence, do you think? Again, a question to both of you, but because it's still a conservative court, it's still 6-3. And so I'm wondering, what role do you see her playing in terms of future SCOTUS decisions, Eric?
Barbara, I see her in the vein of Justice Breyer. She clerked for him at the Supreme Court, and she'll be that voice, that voice that I think represents those that don't have a voice for themselves in society. So I see her ruling, because of course as a law clerk you do write those opinions most of the time, for the justices. So she's been in there, she understands how it goes, she understands. And for Justice Breyer to say that he looks at her as part of his extended family shows you the affinity that he has for her. But if you look at her decisions since she's been a justice and a judge on the bench, you see that she is definitely the type that is going to be a voice for the voiceless, those who are in society that really sometimes don't have a chance. I do see some of those decisions happening. Now, with it being 6-3, of course, a lot of those decisions won't change because, we've been 5-4 for a very long time, almost a generation, 25 years now. So I do see her being a major voice, though.
What about you, Peggy?
Well, I think she brings a different kind of voice to the court. And when they sit in conference, she will be able to bring a perspective of experience that none of them have had. And I think that Judge Jackson has more judicial experience, from what I've read, than 4 of the current justices had when they were nominated combined. So I think that because she has been on the sentencing committee, because she was a public defender, I just think she brings a wealth of experience and perspective that's not there. She's representing a section of this population that has not been represented on that court for a very long time. And I know Justice Thomas is there, but he is of a conservative bent that does not represent African Americans. It does.
I read an article in the Washington Post where they were talking about doing a profile on her and her goal of using intellect and facts to bring people around to a certain perspective, as opposed to protest or throwing it in their face, if you will. Is that her demeanor, Peggy?
She is an intellectual, but she also she is a sister who is down to earth. If you read about her communications and her life with herself, she's a girlfriend, she's a mother, she's a wife. And, I love the perspective of her girlfriend saying how down to earth she is and how much fun they have.
Absolutely.
So, this is not someone who's in an ivory tower who's speaking down. This is someone who's been in the trenches and can speak on all levels, which is fascinating and amazing and something we're so proud of. There's no walk of life that she hasn't experienced. You know what I mean? She comes from community. She's been in community. To be a public defender, doesn't that bring a perspective that is unique? And we need that perspective around that conference table with the rest of those judges when they're looking at laws that they're making. And I think because she clerked for Justice Breyer, she's able to bring a perspective of how to turn minds, to change hearts, to change a point of view. I think she's going to be really impactful, even though she's going to be in the minority in terms of the Republicans having the conservative lead.
On the court, absolutely. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Frank joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Frank. You're on the air.
Hello. I am very glad to hear this. You have commented on the great experience that Judge Brown Jackson has superior, okay? On the other hand, I like that you compare with Amy and Justice Thomas, the two Justice Thomases. Those two guys are very weak academically. Why don't you focus on that, please? They went to unknown undergraduate colleges, and to my knowledge, they were admitted, Amy was admitted to Notre Dame, which is not in the same league as Harvard. So, Mr. Claville, you know a lot about education. Could you please
Okay, Frank. I will get Eric to answer that. Thank you very much. So, Eric, he's saying that the other justices don't have the credentials, academic credentials that Judge Brown Jackson brings.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm not going to. I'm not going to say anything bad about Notre Dame because they put out a lot of great. I mean, we have a lot of great universities across the country, and we know that the schools known as Ivy League. Part of the original 10, which the College of William & Mary was a part of originally here in the Commonwealth. We know that they kind of have a monopoly on the name and putting out a lot of various things and their endowments. So, but I don't want to take away, and I'm not going to take away from the great work of all of our universities here in the country, including our great HBCUs. But I will say this, is that as this nomination goes forward, we will see that two law schools are represented on the Supreme Court exclusively, and that's Harvard and Yale. So, the idea to get other law schools and individuals on the courts who are from other schools, that's a conversation of academicians and others in the circle. So we'll see that coming up. But the education of the other justices on the court are proven. And we see it in their decisions, we see it in their rulings and so forth. So they're all highly respected. But if I could say one quick thing,
sure,
by 30 seconds. A colleague mentioned about the conferences that the Supreme Court justices go to when they look at cases, when they go through cases and so forth. That's very important because it's in those moments where you have the justices that are sitting there by themselves. The law clerks are out of the room. And they go into closed session when they're out of the room. That's where the relationships are built. That's where the influence takes place. And if you have someone like the nominee in the room, speaking up, and not just speaking up, but representing physically, and not just physically or philosophically, but from experience, lived experience, these issues, that's powerful. Yeah. That's powerful because that's where a conservative can be friends with a liberal, and liberal can change the mind of a conservative, and vice versa. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. It has happened, and I think that this nomination will continue to further that.
So, last question on this topic, and that is: are we one and done? In other words, do you think that other Black jurists will be considered for future Supreme Court positions when and if they open? Peggy, I'll go with you first.
Absolutely. And, we have to remember, if we don't see it, we can't be it. And for young people to see her on that court would be the kind of an influence that will inspire others to come forward. Judge Jackson was a star student, but she was told to not to set her sights too high. She had a guidance counselor tell her that when she said she wanted to go to Harvard, the guidance counselor told her that, she was reaching too high. Well, she has proven that the sky is the limit. And you know how many of our young people, unfortunately, are told in the school systems that they're coming up in, oh, don't reach so far. You can't, maybe you ought to reconsider that. Maybe you ought to think about something else. I think that it is important for young people to see that the sky is the limit. We've had a Black president. Now we're going to have somebody on the Supreme Court, hopefully, representing. It is crucial for our young people to see these kinds of amazing women and men in these positions.
So, Peggy, let me ask you this, and Eric, I'll come to you in just a moment, but tell me about the Black Women's Collective. Tell our audience about the collective.
Well, it's a group of women who are from organizations of women, including the National Coalition of Black Women, including She Will Rise, Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote, 200 Black Women, the Black Women Law Deans and Professors. Its focus is, we've got a lot of fabulous Black women, members of sorority, my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a collective of women who are serious about making change and making sure that we are at the table, our voices are heard. Let me tell you that, this collective of women is, I'm sorry, but very responsible for making sure that President Biden was able to win that election, but also keeping his feet to the fire so that he would follow up on the promises that he made. And so we have been very excited and proud to have Judge Brown Jackson nominated. And like I say before, not taken away from the short list of other fabulous Black women who are also being considered. But she is just going to be fabulous. And I just think, people have to realize that these hearings and what's happening now, these Hill visits, we have to think about, as my colleague mentioned, that, this process is very important for us to keep on top of it. Because having these visits and when she comes to the testimony, there are going to be some tough questions. We have to continue to show support.
Absolutely. Eric, was that you? Were you trying to break in?
Yeah. So, Barbara, to your point, is this a one and done? I think it's very important that we get it done now because, as it goes from a policy standpoint and political standpoint, the trend is if African Americans get it, every other minority group, or what I call micro minority group, says, how come we can't be there? So, I think we're going to see a push for other micro minority groups to be a part of the court. Those in various groups like Asian Americans, those in groups such as the LGBTQ community, those in other groups that are, pushing for more recognition and representation. But at the same time, and I say it all the time, African Americans are those that built this country. We're still not getting our just due, but we're inching toward it. And this is a great step toward that. So the more representation we can get of lived experiences of those people that don't have a voice, I think we should continue to push it. But this is our moment. If we don't get it now, I don't know when it's going to come next.
All right. Go ahead, Peggy.
We're going to get it. And I think it's important. It's important for the audience to know, host watch parties, to follow her hearings, call out misinformation, call your senators and congressmen to let them know that you want this nominee to go forward. And it should be a unanimous vote. Her qualifications say she deserves a unanimous vote.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you how people could get involved, but you just gave us that. And Nick also can go to blackwomenleadershipcollective.org and find out more information there. Dr. Peggy Lewis, thank you so much for joining us today on Another View. We are so happy that you were able to give us some perspective on the Supreme Court nominee, and we will be watching.
Okay, thanks so much for having me.
Take care. And if you're just joining us, we're continuing our conversation with Dr. Eric Claville, Director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University and Interim Executive Advisor to the President on Government Relations. He joins us with his award-winning political analysis that we call the Claville Report. So, Eric, I want to change gears and ask you about a sentencing that happened a couple of weeks ago where the police officer, Kim Potter, was found guilty of killing Dante Wright, who was a young Black man who was shot during a traffic stop in Minneapolis. This was after George Floyd. And Judge Regina Chu, was the presiding judge when she gave the sentence for him, for Kim Potter. And I want you to listen to what she had to say.
To those who disagree and feel a longer prison sentence is appropriate, as difficult as it may be, please try to empathize with Ms. Potter's situation. As President Barack Obama once said, learning to stand in somebody else's shoes, to see through their eyes, that's how peace begins. And it's up to you to make that happen. Officer Potter made a mistake that ended tragically. she never intended to hurt anyone. Her conduct cries out for a sentence significantly below the guidelines.
Now, Eric, before that happened, George Floyd happened, and when Derek Chauvin was found guilty and sentenced to a life sentence, people thought we had turned the corner. Then this happened. So were you surprised at the light sentence that Kim Potter received and the judge's reasoning behind that?
You know, Barbara, to answer your question up front, my answer is no, I was not surprised. But also, as you and I were talking earlier, you know, for me, and this is me, and I think a lot of people feel this way, after so much that transpired in 2020, 2021, I was emotionally spent. You know, just it's a lot, you know, and I really didn't have the strength to even follow the trial in depth as I did others, but because I knew in my heart of heart that there was going to be a lenient sentence coming down. Now, did I think it would be 2 years? No, I did not think it would be 2 years. Did I think the judge would cry on the stand for the officer? No, I didn't think that would happen. But I think what this shows, Barbara, it shows that there is a shift. There's a shift in the country toward support for police officers, even if they make a mistake or if they do something intentional, like it used to be prior to 2020. So I think that pendulum is swinging back in that direction. I think we're going to see a lot more of these types of sentences moving forward. As a matter of fact, there's a New York Times opinion article that showed the last 15 previous cases over the last 20 years, which officers said they confused their weapons. Only 3 were convicted of a crime, and 2 officers fired fatal shots, according to this investigative article. And what ended up happening, they mentioned, of course, Oakland, California in 2009. That officer got 2 years. That killed Oscar Grant III at the train station.
Oh, yes.
And then a deputy sheriff in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, he was sentenced to 4 years as he shot and killed a man while he thought he was pulling his taser. You know, so Keith Ellison, of course, the Minnesota Attorney General there, former congressman out of Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, suggested the standard go beyond the sentence range of 6.2 to 8.6 years, right? But what ended up happening is we see what we received. I think that this took a lot of air out of the sail for what we see as it relates to police accountability, and it's put more sail in the opposite direction of support for the police in communities. Now, we know that I think the increase in a lot of the violent crimes, gun violence, and so forth in communities have helped to support that narrative. Again, support that narrative. But as sociologists, as legal professionals, we knew that was going to come about because when you're cooped up for 2 years, you know, people react in ways that we've seen people react, especially with mass mandates and things of that nature. And we see the irate behavior and inexcusable behavior in school board meetings and so forth by parents and things of that nature. So this is all part of us coming out of this pandemic. But the question, I think, for all of us to ask ourselves is, where do we go from here? Is there a middle ground? Is there a ground of equity when we take a look at accountability on all sides?
Well, I want to play a clip from legal expert Elie Mystal. Now, he was on, he's a regular on the Joy Reid Show, which is heard on MSNBC. But he took a little bit of a stronger tack than you did, Eric. And I'm really curious to get your reaction from him. And this was his reaction the day after the sentencing. Let's listen.
Joy, this country hates us. This country hates black people, and we know it. We talk about it. We joke about it. We know what we're up against. But sometimes that hatred that this country has for us really comes out and just takes your breath away, just grabs you by the neck and just takes your breath away. And today, Judge Regina Chu was that hatred, that icy hatred around our throat. She was the spit in our face today to have the unmitigated gall to stand up there, sit up there in her courtroom and plead, cry out for sympathy for the killer in front of that boy's mother. I don't have words to describe how offensive that is, how hurtful that is, how unjust that is, almost goes without saying. People are like, oh, she made a mistake. The Potter made a mistake. Yeah, we have a sentencing guideline for this kind of mistake. It's called 6 to 8 years. Why did she get 2 years? Somebody needs to answer me why she got 2 years. And of course, we all know why she got 2 years. I've got a 9-year-old. He's such a pleaser. He loves people and people love him. And when do I show him Judge Chu's sentencing of Kim Potter? When do I tell my 9-year-old just how deeply this country hates him? When is it appropriate for me to explain to him that even should he be shot to death for an air freshener, this country will sympathize with his murderer? When do I bring that up to my boy? Because I have to tell him, I got to protect him. I've got to tell him at some point what this country will do to him. When is that appropriate to have that discussion? She didn't care about his life. She didn't care about his health. Judge Chu, she wasn't trying to hurt him. No, she was trying to hurt him. We can debate what she was trying to hurt him with, but she was trying to hurt him. That's what happened. And it's what's going to keep happening because there are not enough people in this country who care about stopping it.
Strong reaction from Elie Mystal. And this is not someone who, it has nothing to do with socioeconomics. It has nothing to do with any of that. He is speaking from a father's perspective of a black son. Eric, you have sons. I wonder what your reaction is.
Well, first of all, I agree, with everything that he said, and as you said, we took two different approaches. He took it from the approach of, what do I tell my children? I take from the approach of how society is processing this. But the truth of the matter is that from a very young age, I kept it real with my sons. And my wife and I told us, look, we're going to tell these kids, exactly what it's like because we've lived these Black experiences. Our parents lived it, so we're not going to sugarcoat this. Life is not Disney and Nickelodeon. That does not exist. Okay, I mean, you can have those relationships, but society hasn't changed to accept that at a full length. So, we let them know the realities that your race matters, your gender matters, your success as a Black man matters in the ways that are positive and in the ways that some see as negative. I said, but at the same time, you take all of that energy and you direct it toward positivity. Don't let it stop you, but you have to be mindful and cognizant that there are others that are looking to stop you. And ultimately, just don't give people an excuse. Do your best. You can't be perfect, so don't put that pressure on yourself. But do your very best to be blameless, and then just live your life. So, and at the end of the day, as I like to live my life, I tell my sons this and all around me, make sure you live it to make sure that when you leave here, they knew that you were here. So hopefully these young men who have lost their lives in these tragedies, through murder, those that have lost their lives in these situations, we will know that they were here and take their lives and their examples to do better as a society.
As we've been doing Another View on the radio now for our 11th season, and I have had so many white people say to me, Eric, if you all, meaning Black parents in particular, stop telling your children about how, what's bad about the society in terms of how society treats Black people, then it will stop. And I take that, I wonder how you take that, because they're saying basically, because you have that conversation with your son, because Elie Mystal, ask the question, I have to tell my son because I've got to protect him. But yet others look and say, we're the problem.
Well, listen, I don't worry about other people because personally, if I don't do it, That's parental malpractice, right? If I send you out into the world without telling you what's in the world and how you're going to be and what you're going to approach, I'm the bad parent, and I'm simply not going to do that. But I think people that say that, Barbara, are people that are afraid and ashamed of how society treats them. I mean, bottom line. I mean, we see that with this false CRT movement on one side. You know, it's nobody's teaching indoctrination. We're just simply saying, hey, turn the page and look at the other part of the history, the complete history. We're not saying we write history books. We're just saying take a look at the whole history book. When you look at historical paintings of our founding fathers in the room and they're posed, so eloquently and of bravery, well, there were people outside those doors too. There were people in the kitchen. There were people that were in the fields. What are their stories, and how does it all relate? So we're just saying, tell the whole story. And for those people that do say that, I say to them, read the whole story, and I believe that you would change your perspective.
Right. So we went back in our archives, Dr. Claville, and listened to some past Claville reports. And back in 2018-ish, 16-ish, Lisa, okay, so just before President Trump was elected, so closer to 16, you made a prediction about World War III and that we would be heading in that direction. And now Russia has invaded Ukraine. Is this the beginning?
I think so, Barbara. When we take a look at the world now, the world is void of a leader. And when I say the world is void of a leader, the United States really stood as the sole voice of reason and leadership in the world. Over the past, especially the last 4 years under former President Trump, we've seen a decline in the world where they took the United States as being, the voice of reason, the seriousness of things that happen in the world, where you can come to the United States and you look to the United States, to be there as a help. Now, of course, others would say maybe it happened a little earlier, maybe it's happening now. But the truth of the matter is that if you take a look at our decline in influence across the world, the rise of China, the second largest economy now in the world, we see where individuals don't fear the United States as they used to because the rise of economic power through the BRIC nations and also military-wise. As it relates to Russia, the former Soviet Union, Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, as a young KGB agent, saw the fall of the Soviet Union. He saw the fall of Germany. He saw it. And for him, it was more than just a fall. To him, it was a slap in the face of a country that he loves. And he's been on a trajectory to restore Russia to its grand power of the Soviet Union. So when you talk about Ukraine itself is a nation that is very important to Russia. As a matter of fact, it was part of the original empire of Kievan Rus that actually was ruled by Vladimir the Great back in 900 A.D., part of the Byzantine Empire. Just very quickly, look at the irony in this, Barbara. Both the presidents of Russia and Ukraine are both named after this man. In Slavic, Vladimir means Vladimir. And in Russian, Vladimir means Vladimir. So the very men that are leading these two nations now were actually named after the first ruler that actually created this bond between what we know Russia and what we know as Ukraine. Ukraine was actually, and they all trace their history to it. So from a historical standpoint, I think that's very important. From an economic standpoint, Ukraine is really, it's full of resources. And of course, Russia is, because it supplies 25+% of natural gas to the rest of Europe. So if you notice the building of these pipelines, remember I mentioned the gas pipeline in a former show, but Nord Stream 1 goes straight through Ukraine. and it feeds the rest of Europe. Nord Stream 2 is going through what's called the Black Sea, where they annex Crimea, which is that part of Ukraine that hangs in the Black Sea, right? Mm-hmm. So that's occupied by Russia. And the truth of the matter is that Russia's paying about $2 billion a year to Ukraine to get their gas through there. And of course, they're probably siphoning some off as well. But he wants to take that back. And in order to unify Russia, Ukraine is a major part of that. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, all these nations, they're important geographically, but from a natural resource and economic standpoint, Ukraine is a major nation of the former Soviet Union. So it's from what we see, there are reports that Vladimir Putin is unhinged, that he's more and more isolated. He's not listening to his advisors whatsoever, and he's on a trajectory. China has given a statement saying that they don't condone what he's doing, but their actions say something different. We know that Vladimir Putin is he's the foot soldier, but behind him, China is standing with their arms folded as the bully. But when we talk about World War III, I mentioned that it's not going to start on the ground, but it's going to start in cyber. Right now, we are actually really we're fighting World War III in cyber. So Russia has been the leader in these cyber attacks across the world. They figured a way to really cripple nations, and part of this is through cyber. And as a country, for the last decade, Barbara, and to all your listeners, we've been slow and really negligent to really bolster and solidify our defenses against cyber attacks for our very vital systems within the country, our energy grid, our water grid, our economic chain where we actually transact monies and so forth for goods and services. Barbara, everything is on the grid. Everything is online. So just imagine if we have a cyber attack and we go offline for just 12 hours. Imagine what happens.
Well, I mean, we've seen where things have gone awry, where social media has gone down, or we've had brownouts and blackouts because of issues with the grid and so forth. So just on a minuscule scale, compared to what could happen with another country deciding that they're going to just totally disrupt all of our processes. But can we avoid sending troops? I mean, because I hear about the sanctions and why that's important, but is that going to stop Putin from doing what he's doing?
That's a very good question. There's a lot of dialogue about that, and the first round of sanctions, they didn't really do anything. And the new tougher sanctions that we have really they're going to impact the oligarchs, the very wealthy individuals in Russia. They haven't really targeted Vladimir Putin's wealth himself. He's one of the wealthiest men in the world, by the way. And they haven't targeted him just yet to freeze everything, but I think that's coming, thinking that the oligarchs would be able to get to him to say, hey, let's start some talks, stop what you're doing. But to be very honest with you, this is just me talking, and from my analysis of this, it's not going to stop. I think it's going to embolden him more so. Russian troops are taking losses in the hundreds. We know there are hundreds of Ukrainian citizens and soldiers that have died in this as well. Innocent people that are fleeing for their lives, leaving everything behind. Just the same thing that happened in the Middle East for over 2 decades in other countries. But I don't think that's going to stop it. I think that he knows that he's on a trajectory, and retreat is not part of his DNA. And I think we're going to see more bloodshed before this all ends. Now, can we avoid putting troops on the ground? I don't think we can avoid sending troops to our NATO allies, more specifically around in Poland, and also maybe in some other European countries around there, Hungary and maybe Romania. But I do believe that we're going to have to end up putting troops on the ground, not in Ukraine, because we're sending them military things, equipment, but I believe that we're going to send more troops to our NATO countries to bolster them.
So the people who are in Ukraine, the reports are saying that Putin has been very surprised that they have been as resilient as they have been and fighting back. I saw the picture of him sitting at one end of this really long table with all of his advisors at the other end. I mean, so the optics are very strange.
Yeah. Well, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And Vladimir Putin is very, very keen on image, right? So he knows what he's doing. But for the rest of the world, I think that tells us and shows us just how isolated he is. And it tells us about his thinking. So it's just him. It's him in his head. It's him, the master plan to bring Russia back, to its rightful place as he saw it as the great Soviet Union. Could this be another Cold War? I don't think so. I think that we're at a point now where, it's put up or shut up for him. Of course, he's getting older, so he doesn't have that many years left. But at the same time, I just don't see him backing down fully. If anything, he's not going to give up the areas of separatists that they occupied first before they started their trajectory toward the capital city of Kyiv. So I believe they're going to continue moving forward. Now, when they get to Kyiv, don't be surprised if you see major assault upon Russia, because if that city falls, that city, and I want people to realize, as it relates to the geography of Ukraine, that city is the gateway. I mean, once you pass that city, you keep going. That's the gateway to what we call the West. This is Eastern Europe. What we call the West is Germany, of course, Italy, Belgium, France, and the UK, the major forces in that particular part of the world.
So, I don't hear a lot of conversation about this in the Black community. And tell our listeners why we need to care about what's happening in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just in general, Ukraine, Eastern Europe has always been that enigma for most Americans. And as Americans, I've always said that we're more, our international footprint or concept of international relations is about as, it's not that good because we look at things only affecting us as citizens of the United States and not the world affecting us. But that has changed. And as it relates to Ukraine, you ask the average citizen, if you ask 10 people across the street coming from the university there over to WHRO, just walking down the street, where's Ukraine? I guarantee you nobody could tell you. The capital city of Ukraine. It's just not one of those places that it's not a destination spot, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, Barbara, as it relates to African Americans, it's very important because when troops go, a larger percentage of our troops, of our community, poor Black and brown communities, are those that are going into war on the ground. Now, of course, we have brave citizens, men and women from every ethnic group that sign up for our all-volunteer military, which is still the best military, greatest military in the world. But at the same time, when we take a look at those who are going and being put on the ground, being sacrificed, sacrificing their lives for our country, it's a larger percentage of our communities that are there on the ground. So we do have to care. And then lastly, we have to care as a country because, we're talking about natural resources. So, Barbara, I don't know if you've been to the gas station this week or last week.
Yes, I have.
I don't know if you've been to the grocery store or anything like that, or order something online, but those costs are going to start to shift. And let me tell you, the Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates, but at the same time, their balance sheet is very high, much higher than it was during the time when the markets collapsed. And there are not a lot of tools out there to fight against inflation. So costs of goods and services, food and things for our homes are going to increase. And those of us that don't have a lot of resources, that can't pull from credit and things of that nature, it's going to hit very hard.
So in the last 5 minutes that we have, how are the students doing at NSU? I know that you guys have had several bomb threats, as have all a majority of the HBCUs across the country at this point. How are your students doing?
Barbara, thank you so much for asking. And our students are resilient. Like a lot of our students in our HBCUs are resilient. That spirit trickled down. But there's only so much that anybody can take. This is not the first bomb threat that our university had. We've had this, I think, our third. Mm-hmm. And, of course, my son, who's at Howard University, there was a bomb threat that wasn't publicized as much. And I'm like, so immediately I called. I said, son, you okay? He said, yeah, Dad, everything's fine. We just hunkered down. He said, I'm used to it now. I don't want our children at 18, 19 years old to be used to threats that our grandparents were having in the 40s, in the 50s and 60s, as we remember those that were killed, by bombs because of hatred. Thank God that none of them manifested themselves to be real bombs that exploded. Mm-hmm. But all you need is one. All you need is one. And it breaks my heart that people would do this. But at the same time, our law enforcement is definitely beefing up their support of us. The governor said that he would provide more support in law enforcement. So, we're looking forward to that. And again, we just need to continue to be vigilant. And as I said before, you asked me about, how do I handle this with our kids? I said, listen, be cognizant, but at the same time, be vigilant in how you live your life, and just understand that everybody's not going to roll out the red carpet.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was in the article I was reading about Judge Brown Jackson. She was saying with protests at Harvard, she balanced how the protesting was also taking away from her ability to study and to learn. And I equate these bomb threats also with taking away the ability of these students to study and to learn, because it's interrupting that process. And so how do they, balancing that idea of I'm here to get an education so that I can better myself, I can take care of my future family, et cetera. And yet we've got this distraction that's happening.
Yeah, Barbara, on our campus, our president has instituted with our administrators, a campus of care. And part of that is counseling, but also it's supporting each other through these difficult times. And, you can get PTSD from a lot of stuff. And,
exactly.
We're seeing a lot of students, Barbara, deal with mental health issues. And we know that in our generation, we didn't talk about it that much. But this generation is talking about it. And it's good, because
and that's
now
a good
we can
thing.
Really deal with it.
Yep, because we got to run. We're out of time. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And next time, we will have you right here in the studio. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Eric Claville with Norfolk State University. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you to our listeners. We so appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to Another View. As a reminder, you can find podcasts of all of our shows on our website, anotherviewradio.org. You can also sign up for our eView newsletter, a once-a-week reminder of upcoming programs. Next week on Another View, the award-winning Another View Roundtable, where our pundits are not shy about sharing their points of view on current events. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Please continue to do your part to stop the spread of COVID, and remember to be civil towards those who may behave differently than you do. Stay safe, everyone. I'll see you next week for Another View.
Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College, now becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College, the first choice, whether starting your bachelor's degree or advancing your career. More at tncc.edu.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever. whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.